They said I couldn't even cast a line in the water behind my own home. The HOA claimed it was against community rules, and within days, I was slapped with fines that grew larger every time I refused to back down. At first, it felt petty. Just another power trip by people with nothing better to do. But then it escalated into something far bigger, something that would divide the entire neighborhood. What started as a simple hobby became a war, and the question was, who would end up? Controlling the lake, the HOA, or me? When I first moved into the neighborhood, it felt like a dream. The kind of community you imagine when flipping through glossy real estate brochures, neat lawns trimmed to perfection, tidy sidewalks where families waved as they passed, and a quiet lake at the center that seemed like the crown jewel of it all. I had worked hard for years to finally afford a place like this, a home where I could breathe, relax, and enjoy the peace I thought I was buying. The house itself wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. A cozy backyard opened up to a stunning view of the lake. Every morning, I'd sip coffee on the deck while the water reflected the sky like glass. It wasn't just beautiful, it felt healing. After years of long commutes and late nights at work, I had finally found my sanctuary. Neighbors often boasted about how the lake made the community special. Kids would ride their bikes around it, older couples strolled at sunset, and on weekends, families gathered for picnics along its edge. The HOA always made sure to mention, in their cheerful newsletters, how the lake was a symbol of unity and shared responsibility. At first, I didn't think much of it. I was just happy to have it in my backyard. But unlike some of the families who were content to admire it from a distance, I wanted to enjoy it fully. Fishing had always been my escape, something I picked up as a child with my grandfather. Sitting quietly with a rod in hand, listening to the gentle ripple of water, brought me a calm nothing else could. So naturally, when I saw the lake just a few steps from my back porch, I thought, this is perfect. For a while, life was peaceful. I kept to myself, made polite small talk with the neighbors, and settled into a routine. The HOA board seemed harmless enough, older retirees who spent more time arguing about the shade of the mailbox paint than anything else. They sent out their rules, their reminders, and their monthly dues invoices, and I complied. I didn't see any reason to rock the boat. But cracks in the perfect community image started to show sooner than I expected. Some neighbors whispered about how the HOA president had a tendency to enforce rules selectively. Others hinted that certain board members liked to make examples of homeowners who didn't fall in line. I brushed it off. Every neighborhood has its gossip, I told myself. Still, there was something unsettling about how watchful they seemed, almost as if every lawn, every porch, every small action was under constant surveillance. I noticed the way their eyes lingered when I carried fishing gear to my backyard, though no one said anything at first. It was subtle, almost unspoken, but I could feel the tension quietly building. I had no idea then that a single afternoon by the water would set off a chain reaction. What I thought was harmless, just a hobby on my own property, would soon ignite one of the most bitter fights this neighborhood had ever seen. It started small, the kind of thing you almost laugh off at first. A letter in the mailbox from the HOA. Notice of violation. The paper was thin, the wording clinical, but the message was clear. Fishing in the community lake is strictly prohibited. Cease immediately or fines will be imposed. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. I wasn't hurting anyone. The lake was literally behind my home, part of what I paid for when I bought the property. It wasn't some public park where strangers came and went. It was our shared space. And yet, there it was in black and white, a rule that I had never seen before, buried deep in the association's handbook. I crumpled up the letter and shrugged it off. Surely, no one would seriously enforce something this petty. After all, kids played soccer on the grass by the water, teenagers skipped rocks across the surface, and nobody batted an eye. Fishing, of all things, couldn't possibly be the line in the sand. But the second letter came 3 days later. This one wasn't so friendly. The fine was already posted to my account, $50 for the first offense, and if I didn't pay, the letter warned, "Further action will be taken." I remember staring at that paper, heat rising in my chest. $50 for sitting in my own backyard, enjoying the water. It wasn't about the money, it was about the principle. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to pay. And that's when the real war began. The fines escalated fast, $100 the next week, then $200. Every time they caught me with a fishing rod in my hand, another violation showed up in the mailbox. It was as if they had someone on patrol, watching my every move. I'd step outside, barely settle into my chair, and within hours there'd be another warning taped to my door. Neighbors started to notice. Some whispered that I was brave for standing up to the board. Others avoided me, not wanting to be associated with the troublemaker on the lake. The HOA thrived on that fear, the quiet pressure that kept most people from ever questioning their authority. But I refused to be intimidated. So I pushed back. I wrote letters demanding proof of their rule. I highlighted vague language in their covenant documents. I argued that nowhere did it clearly state that a homeowner couldn't fish from their own yard. Days turned into weeks of back and forth. Each time, their responses grew colder, more threatening, as if they were daring me to keep resisting. Then came the meeting. It was one of those mandatory HOA gatherings held in the stuffy clubhouse. Rows of folding chairs, stale coffee on a side table, and board members sitting up front like judges in a courtroom. I took a seat near the back, listening as they droned on about landscaping budgets and new paint requirements. And then, my name. They announced it loudly, like a public shaming. They cited me for repeated violations and warned the community that non-compliance threatened the integrity of shared resources. Integrity. All I was doing was fishing. I could feel the eyes of my neighbors turning toward me. Some sympathetic, others annoyed, a few just curious to see what would happen next. My chest tightened as the board president smirked from his seat, reveling in the spectacle. That night, I went home angrier than ever. They weren't just fining me anymore. They were trying to humiliate me. The harassment escalated from there. I started finding anonymous notes shoved under my door, crude messages telling me to follow the rules or move out if you don't like it. My trash cans were mysteriously knocked over, my mailbox stuffed with crumpled newsletters. It was clear the board had rallied their little circle of loyalists to make my life miserable. But instead of backing down, it lit a fire in me. I doubled down. I began researching homeowner rights, digging through case law, reading stories of other HOA battles across the country. The more I read, the clearer it became. Most homeowners lost because they gave up too soon. They paid the fines, kept their heads down, and let the board grow stronger. Not me. So I started documenting everything. Every letter, every fine, every petty act of harassment. I kept a folder so thick it could barely close. And then I did something the HOA didn't expect. I hired a lawyer. The first time their office received a letter from mine, the tone of their responses shifted. They weren't smug anymore. They were cautious, careful. But the fines didn't stop. If anything, they doubled down, perhaps thinking they could outlast me. The battle lines were drawn. Then came the breaking point. One evening, I was sitting in my yard with a rod in hand when a security guard, hired by the HOA, marched up to me. Clipboard in hand, he ordered me to vacate the lakefront, my own property. I refused, of course. But instead of leaving, he pulled out his phone, snapped photos of me, and told me he was documenting the violation. The humiliation burned. My neighbors stood on their porches watching. Some whispered, some laughed. I had never felt so cornered, so stripped of dignity in a place that was supposed to be my refuge. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, and realized something. This wasn't just about fishing anymore. This was about control. If the HOA could strip me of something as harmless as casting a line in the water, what else could they take? I knew I couldn't keep playing defense. I had to go on the offensive, and so I made a decision that would shock the entire neighborhood. I wouldn't just fight the HOA's rules, I would take away their power altogether. From that moment on, everything shifted. My lawyer and I began exploring the legal structure of the community, and that's when we discovered something the board never expected anyone to notice. The lake wasn't fully owned by the HOA. It had been left in a strange legal limbo years earlier when the developer transferred property rights. The HOA managed it, but they didn't technically own it, which meant someone else could. The idea sounded crazy at first, impossible even. But the more we dug, the more real it became. I had the resources. I had the determination. And with the right paperwork, I could do something no homeowner had ever dared to try. I could buy the lake. And once I did, everything would change. The paperwork went through faster than I expected. Weeks of back and forth, signatures, notarized forms, and a painful amount of legal fees finally ended with a single email from my lawyer. "Congratulations, it's yours." Just like that, the lake, the very body of water the HOA had used as a weapon against me, belonged to me. Not the HOA, not the board president, not the community. Me. I remember walking down to the shoreline that evening, documents in hand, staring at the water as if seeing it for the first time. The same surface that had reflected my frustration, my helplessness, and my anger now shimmered with something different. Victory. The HOA had no idea what was about to hit them. The next board meeting was the moment everything flipped. The president, smug as ever, started with his usual list of violations, budgets, and reminders. I sat in the back row, calm, almost invisible, until my name came up again. "Ongoing fines," he said, "for continued violations of lake use policies." That's when I stood. My lawyer walked in behind me, carrying a folder thick with documents. The room grew quiet as I placed the deed on the table. The president glanced at it, confused at first, and then his face went pale. "This," I said, my voice steady, "is the title to the lake. As of last week I own it, which means the HOA doesn't." Gasps rippled through the room. Some neighbors leaned forward, others whispered to each other, and the board sat frozen. The president stammered, trying to regain control, insisting it was impossible, that the lake was common property. But the deed was clear, and the legal team backing me was undeniable. In one moment, the entire dynamic of power in the neighborhood collapsed. The fallout was immediate. The board scrambled, desperate to undo what had happened. They threatened lawsuits, they called emergency sessions, they even tried to rally homeowners against me. But none of it mattered. The legal oversight from years. Ego, the developer's sloppy paperwork, was their undoing. They had managed the lake, yes, but they had never actually owned it. And now that I did, their rules meant nothing. I wasted no time making my position clear. New signs went up around the shoreline. Private property, fishing by permission only. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. After months of being fined, harassed, and humiliated for fishing in my own backyard, the HOA now had to ask me for permission to use the water they once lorded over. Some neighbors celebrated quietly, slipping me handshakes or whispered, "Good for yous," when the board wasn't around. Others, the ones who had always sided with the HOA, fumed with resentment. But the balance of power had shifted forever, and there was nothing they could do about it. The president, humiliated, eventually resigned. His allies followed one by one, unable to maintain their stranglehold without the lake as their leverage. The HOA still existed, of course, still sending out newsletters about trash pickup and lawn care, but its teeth had been pulled. The fear it once commanded was gone. For me, life changed in ways I hadn't expected. At first, there was satisfaction. pure, undeniable satisfaction in watching them crumble. Every time I cast my line into the water, I felt a sense of defiance, a reminder that I had stood my ground and won. And over time, something deeper settled in. I realized it wasn't just about fishing or fines or even revenge. It was about control, about how easily ordinary people can be bullied into submission when those in power abuse their authority. I had proven to myself and to everyone watching that you don't have to accept it. Over time, something deeper settled in. I realized it wasn't just about fishing or fines or even revenge. It was about control, about how easily ordinary people can be bullied into submission when those in power abuse their authority. I had proven to myself and to everyone watching that you don't have to accept it. The long-term consequences were even more surprising. Word of the story spread beyond the neighborhood. Other homeowners from nearby communities reached out, asking how I'd done it, how they could fight back against their own boards. Some shared horror stories of petty fines, outrageous demands, and endless harassment. It was as if my battle had given them permission to push back, to believe that they too could win. Meanwhile, the lake itself took on a new role. No longer a symbol of HOA control, it became a reminder of independence. I allowed kids to fish freely, just as I once had, and even organized small community events by the water. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. That freedom, the power to decide for myself, was sweeter than anything the HOA had ever offered. The board, reduced to handling trash schedules and holiday decorations, never dared to challenge me again. They knew better. Still, the experience left scars. I'll never forget the nights lying awake, wondering if I was making a mistake, if they'd bury me under fines or crush me with endless legal battles. I'll never forget the humiliation of being singled out, shamed, and ridiculed in front of my neighbors. Those memories don't vanish, even in victory, but they also serve as fuel, a reminder that standing up for yourself is rarely easy, but always necessary. Years later, when I sit by the water with my fishing rod, I sometimes think back to that first notice in the mailbox. A single piece of paper meant to intimidate me, to strip away a harmless joy. How easily I could have folded. How easily I could have paid the fine and given up. But instead, I fought. And in fighting, I not only reclaimed my lake, I reclaimed my dignity. The HOA thought they were teaching me a lesson about rules, compliance, and obedience. But in the end, they learned a far harsher lesson. When you push ordinary people too far, when you strip away their freedoms and try to humiliate them into submission, you might just create your own downfall. And that's exactly what happened here. So now, I'll leave you with this. What would you do if the place you called home, the sanctuary you worked your whole life to build, suddenly became a battlefield because of people drunk on petty power? Would you keep your head down and comply, or would you fight back, knowing the cost, but refusing to let them win? Because sometimes, the only way to protect your home is to take away theirs.